Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be around the globe. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. With increasing regulation, reliance on contingent workers, and a demographic shift that are all leading to an increased demand for understanding the competency gap in the workforce, it's more important than ever before to understand and close this gap. And you in HR know this very well. It's linked directly to safety management processes and the success of a safety management program. However, why are today's competency management approaches falling short? In this session, you'll learn what the key elements are for a comprehensive competency management framework, how a true competency management framework architecture supports a safety program's requirements, and how capturing experience levels in addition to proficiencies can make a real difference. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about the association that is bringing this webinar to you today. This is the HRO Today Services and Technology Association, and we are a membership channel. We're also a community, and we're dedicated to professional development through research, industry trends, and expert panel discussions and webinars like the one you're on today. We provide peer-to-peer networking opportunities, lots of discussions, lots of Q&A sessions, and best practice sharing like the one you're on now, and practitioner, provider, and industry thought leaders, and expert collaboration. Particularly excited about our speakers here today talking about safety. Some of the benefits we provide are our thought leadership councils. I'll talk a little bit about those in just a second. Networking opportunities to participate in research. We have a full research department that works with companies to conduct full research reports and papers on topics that are important to HR, and access to members-only content that's on our website. We also have events that we run, and as a member you get discounts to those events and also a digital subscription in our magazine, HRO Today. Mentioned our thought leadership councils just a minute ago. There are 4 areas that we run our thought leadership councils. One is talent acquisition, second is talent management, employee relations and services, and outsourcing. You're today on the one for employee relations and services, which does deal with safety, compensation, benefits, payroll, compliance, wellness, policies, and all things related to employee relations and services. We also offer webinars and programs in our other 3 areas for talent acquisition, talent management, and outsourcing monthly, and you can find those on our website in the bottom left of your screen. I mentioned events. Our next event coming up is our North American Forum. It's a premier event for HR executives. It will be in Chicago at the very nice Drake Hotel. I've been there. It's a wonderful place, very historic, and a really great place to have an event. If you're interested in attending that, feel free to contact me following today's webinar. And you may contact me here. There's my email address. My name is Scott. Our executive director is Zachary. You may also contact him as well. That is my direct phone line and my direct email. So here's some brief background about our speakers today. Jai Shah is a managing partner with Hula Partners and currently serves as the head of product innovation and development. It's very impressive. He has a 20-year track record in developing software solutions for HR, and has devoted his time recently to working with practitioners in heavily regulated industries in particular, addressing their competency management needs through technology. And Tom White's here with us as well today. Great to have Tom. He's a senior consultant with Hula Partners as well, and is a key player in the development and implementation of the programs that they run. And some of his clients include ConocoPhillips, Marathon Oil, and Cameron International. So it is my pleasure today to start the webinar and to introduce Jai to take it away. Jai, I will go ahead and give you the screen control so you can get started.
Great, thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. And just make sure I can advance. All right. So again, thanks for the introduction, Scott. Tom and I are happy to present today about a very important topic for us at Hula Partners, given our customer base and really the evolution that we see in the HR business function specific to competency management. And we think it's an exciting time for really embracing competency management as a business process, and are seeing that spin out of various regulated industries even into software industries, and the benefits are truly amazing in terms of correlating competency to operational performance. But it really started with a focus on safety. So we'll talk about that. We'll define kind of what we see as the problem currently, or what was the problem that is now being solved through competency management. We'll present a solution conceptually around why competency management matters, why we think it's the answer, and what HR can really gain from this beyond just the safety concerns. There's a big win for HR from a talent development and planning perspective, and then how to go about implementing a competency management program. So there is definitely some inertia initially in terms of getting started. We'll talk a little bit about how to go over that and how to structure a program to really achieve success. And then we'll look at some practical use cases by industry, and kind of end there. And if there are any questions, please use the chat window or the question window, whichever one you may have. Send through questions, and we'll certainly leave some time at the end to address those. All right. So quick introduction. Let's see if I can advance the slides. I'm going to skip my introduction. Scott, you covered it, but go right on to Hula Partners. Just to give you a little bit of context about our company and where we come from in terms of perspective, we've been focused on HR technology. The founding members have all been working in this space for 20 years plus. So a long history since the early 90s of really looking at the evolution of HR applications from simply core HR administration around payroll and benefits and time tracking, and into now what has really become a really interesting playing field in terms of talent development, talent management, analytics, planning. And so we bring that perspective to competency management and safety. As a company, we provide architecture and roadmap services, so a lot of strategic work around HR technology selection, process redesign, competency framework development, those types of services. We have a technology and product innovation group, which is the group that I head up and is really focused on actually producing and maintaining and deploying software products such as the competency management system we've developed called Kahuna. We have a robust SAP and SuccessFactors implementation services business, so we do a lot of actual configuration and integration of SAP SuccessFactors as kind of our platform in general. And then we provide post-implementation support across all those different channels. So we have a robust infrastructure for providing support. So it's with that we really started to develop our solution. And if you look at this is a snapshot of our customer base. And you'll notice a lot of oil and gas customers on here. It's where we have our roots. Certainly we have a large presence in the Houston market, Houston, Texas market. And all the founding members had worked pretty extensively through some HR transformation projects in oil and gas. And oil and gas is really leading the effort to revitalize a look at true competency management. And we'll define what we mean by competency management here shortly, because it's very important that we understand what we're talking about when we talk about competencies. And again, the impetus for this in oil and gas was certainly environmental incidents that had occurred, safety violations, or safety incidents which actually caused loss of life in many cases. And the industry as a whole decided that really one of the things lacking was a true measure of competency, and that the leaders of the industry got together and said, we believe that if we can improve competency rates or competence, measured competence, observed competence, we believe we're going to see a reduction in safety incidents. We believe we're going to see the impact of those incidents lessen. And for the leaders in the industry that have actually now have data to measure that, that was definitely borne out in the data. So they are able to correlate their competency rates with reduction in safety incidents. And so we'll hit on that. We'll talk about that a lot in this presentation. But as a way of where we come from, in that perspective, as we were leading these transformation efforts, our customers kept demanding these competency solutions, and as a result, we saw an opportunity to construct a competency management platform to address this need. And one of the things we'll talk about also in this conversation is how HR has typically approached this problem and why that has fallen short. So the last thing I'll say about this slide is everything we talk about, really, our motto is to build solutions that are based on customer requirements, things that actually are being requested for and asked for in the field by operations. We view this as a very operations-driven business process that HR can support and benefit from and partner and collaborate with operations on. But HR can't solve this problem alone. The use cases are very much operationally driven, and when the HR departments that accept that and collaborate on a solution are the ones that are successful in this process. So that is that. Okay, so the problem. We define the problem really as something we call the competency management gap. And that's a term or a phrase that can be really applied to a couple different levels or perspectives in looking at this problem. One is the pure competency management gap between the requirements of your workers and their actual competence levels and having insight into that gap. That's definitely a very literal application of that phrase. But we also see kind of more nuanced gap between how HR has looked at competency management and how operations has looked at competency management, and what the implications of that mismatch are on safety in particular. So again, in several of our industries, but oil and gas in particular, there is a big retirement wave. So they call it the big shift change. When there was a kind of a bust in the industry in the 80s, there were not a lot of new people coming in. So right now you have a wide spread in the demographic. You got a lot of top-level talent with a lot of tribal knowledge that is hitting retirement eligibility, and then you have a gap between that and then the lower-level engineering and operations talent that is now making up a large part of the organization. So how do you impart the knowledge from those that are leaving the organization to those that are younger workers, the millennials in the workforce? You've got increasing regulation. So we've had multitude of environmental incidents, very high-profile incidents, and that has led to a lot of regulation. So you had Piper Alpha in the North Sea, you had Macondo in the Gulf, BP oil spill that obviously had huge, devastating impacts, and are really reshaping the industry in many ways. And regulation is a big part of that. You have contingent workers, so visibility into their competence it becomes extremely important. And then you've got the expectations of the millennial generation in terms of how they'll interact with technology, how they want to interact with learning, for instance, and development, and that's changing. So the old methods don't necessarily work, and this pressure just served to highlight and serve to put an emphasis on the gap between how HR was serving this area of competency management and what the expectations of operations were. And what I mean by that is HR typically would look at competencies and think about critical values, think about Lominger or PDI leadership qualities, and operations looks at a competency and says, it's a very tactical, measurable, technical skill. And somewhere in the middle is really the answer, and it's an all of the above that need to be accommodated in a solution. Because certainly there are leadership traits that are important to measure and assess and qualify, but just as important to that process is the ability to track the, in some cases 50 to 100 technical skills that are required to do a job. And those 50 to 100 technical skills don't lend themselves to an annual performance review. They don't lend themselves to the typical HR processes and tools that would normally be applied to solve this problem. So as a result, HR ignored, in many cases, ignored that use case and just settled upon the softer competency set and measurement and operations really, looked at that as a check-the-box activity from an annual performance cycle perspective. But now we see things like, some companies actually getting rid of the annual performance cycle altogether for certain demographics of their workforce. And those trends are leading to this idea that a more objective empirical measurement of competence is really the thing that's going to serve those folks in those roles a lot better than our traditional approaches to performance. So really, this slide is meant to communicate that gap between HR and operations is essentially, once closed, again, the impetus is safety, but you're going to see that there are a lot more benefits that can be derived, and there's a big win for HR in approaching closing of this competency management gap. All right, so Tom, I'm going to let you take the next couple of slides and maybe explain some of the more empirical evidence that we have gained or gotten to support our theories.
Okay, thanks, Jai. Hello, everyone. So this next slide is where Hula Partners teamed up with reputation leaders and performed a survey with HR executives around the US. And we got some really good information from this survey, and we can go through that here. So we're going to break this down into 3 different sections. The first, where we got a great insight into the lack of knowledge or the gap surrounding what's happening in the company from a safety perspective. The second section is really what the power of competency management, and so wins you can get by a good model. And then thirdly is how is competency management and a competency management system being utilized at companies that we surveyed. So first of all, when we spoke to or surveyed the community, we found a striking number of the HR executives didn't have a good understanding of the safety incidents that are occurring at their company. So 6 out of 10 people did not have a good grasp on how many incidents were occurring per year for their company. And again, these are incidents that are affecting their people in HR, the people they're looking after and driving and developing. And on top of that, 1/2 of the people surveyed didn't realize not only how many incidents that occurred, but what impact did this have on their organization. So how many days were lost due to these incidents. So that just underlying gap of knowledge is something that a competency management system and a competency management process can help highlight, and we'll talk about that further in the presentation. The second piece of information we gleaned in this is really how are companies measuring competencies and what systems are they using to manage the process. So again, 1/3 of the population we surveyed are currently using a performance management system, and as Jai alluded to earlier, that really has some gaps, especially on the safety or compliance competencies that are so important in this space. Performance management systems are great for high-level behavioral competencies that you can assess on a yearly basis, communication, leadership, and so on. But they really don't cut it for these more nuanced job role compliance competencies. And 1/3 of the companies, again, are using a performance management system. We also found out that 1/4 of the organizations are using an LMS to manage their competencies from a regulatory perspective. And the LMS may be better in this space because you have the ability to track training and so on, compliance-based training. However, there's lots of gaps that don't completely fulfill the competency management process and allow you to get these wins and find the benefits of the process. So we'll cover that shortly. But the main area is that learning does not equal compliance or competence. And then we've got a good mixture of other systems and processes being used by the rest of the organization. So that just shows you that the systems they're using today are not really giving them the insight into some of the incidents that are occurring. If we move on to the second infographic here, we can see that competency management really does, when performed well, can have a big impact on safety and compliance incidents for your organization. So of the people who are surveyed, 95%, so 95 out of every 100, said that competency management processes and systems would actually prevent safety and compliance issues. So it would have that real impact on their company where it would stop people from being injured, help the environment, and also increase revenues and profits because of the lack of lost days. On top of that, out of the people who responded to the above question, they said that 4 in 10 of these people said that safety occurrences are actually preventable from using competency management. So 40% of all the safety incidents that occurred maybe could have been prevented if they had good competency management processes in place. If we look at the bottom section where it says the do's and don'ts, so we can see that if you have a competency management process in place, you're actually going to have half as many incidents and days lost per year than if you don't have it in place. And that's a big impact for organizations. That's real money, that's real people, safety involved. And it has that quite a clear impact from 50 to 108. The last infographic set we're going to go through is really how is competency management systems being leveraged and what kind of business processes feed off of this. So as Jai spoke about before, competency management from a safety perspective is key, but it also can be leveraged in other talent management processes. And what we're seeing from the survey is that the majority of the talent management processes are really underutilized using this competency data, this objective skill data. So if you look on the infographic on the right-hand side, you can see that the 30% of the organizations are using competency management to drive learning and development. You'd have thought that would be higher because competency management is a really good way of identifying the demand and supply of learning items. If a learning item or a course has no impact on competencies of your workforce, then there's a good question to be asked of why you're doing that in the first place. If we work down there slightly, we can go to the talent management. So key talent processes, again, are underutilized. Only 20% of the companies are using competencies within that process. And the way that competencies can drive that process is the objectivity. So before you may be filling talent pools for succession management just on the conversations with leaders and so on. You can use competencies to drive this process, and you have real data, empirical data, to know exactly what type of people do I need, and then through assessments you can find those people and plug them in. So this is really somewhere that has been lacking at the moment in the industry, where talent management is really not based on this key important competency data. And finally, who has taken part in these competency programs? So maybe unsurprisingly, not every employee in the company is going through a competency management process, so there's some holes there. So maybe they're focused more on leadership, or maybe they're focused more on your technical workforce, but they generally don't cover everyone. So there are people within organizations who are not going through this rigorous process of being assessed, and that can leave some holes and areas where safety incidents can apply. And then the last thing I want to point out on this slide is that we found that the majority of contractors are not covered in the competency management process. And again, this is something that Jai mentioned earlier with the contingent workforce, but it's really is key. Contingent workforces are making up a greater percentage of the workforce. And if you're not sure that, if you don't have visibility and a good understanding of their competencies, but put them onto key jobs and tasks, then incidents can occur and will occur. And your organization not only does not have the knowledge of that, but your organization really has to pay the price of the incidents when they occur. It's not the contractor. So, Jai, can we just move on to the next one?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So the infographics gave us some great insight into the current state, the current gaps of the HR community when it comes to competency management and how it relates to safety incidents. And now it's important for us to define, what do we see as competency management? What is competency management? Who's view of competency management? And for us, it's the competency management business process is the entirety of assigning, assessing, and tracking the knowledge, skills, and experiences to perform specific activities. So if I just break that down, assigning competencies is creating the competency catalog, all of that information, and then finding a good, efficient, and accurate way of assigning these competencies to people to make sure that they are held accountable for their day-to-day job. The next step is assessing. So now you've got the competencies and requirements assigned to the workforce. We need to make sure there's an objective assessment in place. And not only is the objective assessment in place, but you have the right people performing the assessments. It could be as simple as saying that the supervisor should be the assessor. However, in all cases, the supervisor wouldn't be the subject matter expert for a specific type of skill or knowledge. And then it's the tracking of these competencies. So it's the tracking of the competency management program overall. Are the users performing assessments? And then secondly, how are they developing towards their goal of being compliant, 100% compliant across the board? Are they developing towards that goal? And once they've got there, can we develop them further for their future role? So that's the business process. The knowledge, skills, and experiences are your KSAs. So that's the ability to say that this specific task can be broken down into these subtasks, and that's how you're going to be assessed. And on top of the KSAs, which I think we're all familiar with, we see experience as being a key part of your competency management process. So experience is not necessarily can you do the activity, but how many times have you done the activity? And why that is key is you can't always teach and assess everyone to the fullest extent. So sometimes in adverse conditions, for example, someone would never be assessed in those adverse conditions. But if they have lots of experience performing that task, they're probably going to be less likely to cause an incident or have a safety incident in those types of situations. So that's a key data point that's often missing in competency management systems and processes. Not to say that you've been assessed, but also how many times have you completed that task. And I think this feeds onto the next slide, Jai, where we define competency management one step further. So competency management and the idea of a competency is not solely determined by learning management. They're two separate business processes. They're very intertwined, they build upon one another, and you really get the most amount of value when you separate them into pure competency management and learning management. You get the most out of the business processes as well as the systems that underline those business processes. So what do I mean by this? So learning competence, because you can complete a learning item, you can complete a course. Maybe if we take the example of lockout tagout, you can go on a lockout tagout course. Maybe it's instructor-led or a video, and you can go through, you can understand it in the moment. But that doesn't mean you should necessarily go out in the field and perform quite a dangerous task like lockout, tagout, unless you've been assessed and you can prove that you've done it. So it's that additional step above learning, which is the performed or demonstrated assessment. So that's how we see it. Learning is really a step towards competence, but there needs to be that additional physical or performance assessment on top of it. And how can competency management drive learning management as well? And that's something we've seen from lots of our clients at the moment. It's really, from a learning management perspective, it's very hard for the workers, the people in the field, to have a good knowledge of why they are taking certain courses. They know they have to take the lockout tagout course because it's important, it's part of their curriculum. But using purely a learning management system, you don't have that insight of which competencies does this support? What part of my job can I not do because I haven't taken this course? It's also important because traditionally in the learning management system, it's hard to see the gaps of your team. If you're a supervisor out in the field, you can see that some people haven't taken one course, other people haven't taken another course. But it's hard to compare them and say, these are my guys who have not only taken these key safety training courses, but also they've demonstrated their competence in these key areas. So these are the guys I need to put on a specific project. I need to balance my upcoming shift with a mixture of guys who have completed all their training tasks and their assessment, and some new guys to get the exposure and build up to being assessed. The final piece on here is the demand and supply of learning. So not only, as I mentioned earlier, you have to ask the initial question of if my learning course has nothing to do with competencies, then what's the real driver for the organization to pay for that and to keep that going if it's not adding any value to the competencies of my organization? But secondly, it helps with the demand and supply of putting on those courses and measuring the best courses as well. So if you can see a specific area in your workforce where your users are struggling to become competent, you know that you might need to put on additional courses in that area. You need to make sure that's more robust. And if there are already courses that are supporting these competencies that have gaps, you need to ask the question, is this course the right course? Is it being led correctly? Is the vendor doing the best job? And it really just opens your eyes into, maximizing the learning experience. And that's all I have for this slide, Jai, if you have anything to add.
No, I'll just add that at this point really can't be overstated. A lot of people check the box and say that learning is tracking of learning relative to specific classes or regulated training from a safety perspective is the end. And when you look at some of the more devastating incidents that have occurred in various industries, oftentimes there'll be a phrase that says, all trained, none competent, which means that the people involved had the required training, but they'd never been assessed on their competence levels relative to the job that they were actually performing. So I think that's a really important point that can't be overstated again. All right, so where specifically does competency management fit into an overall safety management program? So when we look at safety management, typically there are 4 pillars. There is safety policy, so formal safety policy. There is risk identification, so knowing the critical areas where you're at risk, and there's assurance, which says, what am I doing to mitigate that risk? And then there's promotion of a safety culture overall. And while we feel like competency management plays well in all of those, really it's in the risk and assurance buckets where you can, from a human factors perspective, really see benefits from adopting competency management. So let's dive into that a little bit. When we talk about risk identification, clearly understanding the gaps, your current competency gaps, is a key factor in identifying risk. In addition, and when you look at how that kind of plays out tactically, you look at processes like scheduling or shift balancing, where if you know that you've got a shift that's unbalanced, in terms of their coverage of safety critical competencies, you have a risk that you need to close. And so that becomes very important. Without the insight of what the job entails, what the safety critical competencies are, and how your people map up against those, you have no way of identifying that risk. So that's a very clear use case of where competency management helps. And then from an assurance perspective, how am I closing those gaps? So learning and training could be one answer. The idea of observed assessments and just working towards a culture where you are ingraining this idea of assessments into the everyday workload of your people, that alone is an assurance methodology, because what you're doing is proactively asking people to develop themselves against the most high priority competencies from a safety critical perspective on a daily basis. So again, that gap identification, competency assurance, and then weaving in training and development become very key to an overall safety management program. But part of this that doesn't get talked about, I think, often enough, and is maybe the biggest benefit out of understanding and tying together competencies, is the idea of management of change. So specifically, there are use cases such as introducing new equipment into a heavy equipment into an environment, a work environment. So you have a new piece of equipment that needs to be operated. It comes with a set of procedures, a set of safety precautions that need to be followed. How do I best identify the people who are going to be affected and push out the information relative to that equipment? And if you have a competency model that identifies the people who are affected by that equipment, and you can proactively push them information about new safety policies, procedures relative to that equipment, you're going to, that is the idea of managing a very dynamic work environment and managing the change that might be introduced into that environment over time. And again, we feel like from a human factors perspective, the only way to do that effectively is to have people in roles, and those roles have defined competencies, and then those competencies be tied to things like equipment. So, again, that just is a really important step in promoting overall promotion of a safety culture. And before I go too much further, I believe there was a question on one of the earlier slides about what HES, I think it was HES, stands for, and that's Health, Environment, and Safety. Some people refer to it as HSE, some companies HES, but that was the idea there. Oops, wrong button. Okay, so we've talked a lot about competency management and how how we think it's the answer from a safety perspective. But I think when we start to think about this more broadly, safety is certainly an impetus, but there are a whole host of wins for both HR and operations from adopting a competency management application framework and process. And really, for us, it's the next generation of objective measurement that's going to really inform all of your activities around recruiting, learning, development, workforce planning. All of that becomes more possible and will be more accurate if you're doing it based on empirical, objective evidence of where you stand today. And without having really the knowledge of your workforce, where it stands against these critical competencies, you're really kind of taking a guess at many of these talent processes and the investment that you're making in these talent processes. So, it starts with safety, certainly, but I think the win is much more on a business level. It is the opportunity for HR to pick up this mantle of competency management and become real, elevate the position of HR to a real strategic business partner. And again, if you think about a model in which you are measuring the effectiveness of your learning, and you're proactively going to your operations folks and saying, you know, I think we need to refocus our efforts from a learning perspective from you know, what we're doing today to a different model because we have a critical gap, or because we've satisfied this area. We are overconfident in one area. So why do we keep running the same training class? Those are the types of things and the information and the insight that you'll have if you adopt this process and get behind it. And on an operations perspective, we're now supporting use case such shift planning, such as workforce plan, long-term workforce planning, execution in the field around deploying ad hoc resources into stressful environments on a situation that require advanced situational awareness. And those are insights, again, they can only get through tracking of both competency proficiency and that experience element that Tom mentioned. So that's when things really get interesting and the value of this program really comes to light. All right, so moving on. And again, you know, we have customers who have now years of data, and the correlations are pretty striking in terms of adoption of a competency management framework and program and system to track and manage this data, and safety. So overall safety, number of incidents, there's a absolute 100% correlation between competence and a reduction in the number of incidents. An absolute correlation between the cost per incident. So the impact of incidents as well as the number of incidents goes down when your competency levels go up. Profitability. So when you look at on an individual level, the reduced time to revenue. So how quickly can I get an employee to a point where they're a revenue-producing employee, as well as reduced cycle times, meaning they make fewer mistakes, so there's less rework, which leads to operational efficiency. And then finally, retention. There have been a lot of studies about competence levels and adoption of a competency management framework and transparency that's provided to your employees and their engagement, which has led to better retention of employees. And these are just three areas that we highlight, but these are three very critical areas from an HR perspective that we feel like you know, just really come through. And again, there is objective empirical evidence to back this up. So Tom, I'm going to let you take over and talk a little bit about you know, what makes a successful competency management system.
Sure. Thanks, Jai. So hopefully we've discussed the importance of competency management on the safety environment and some of the key benefits that Jai just outlined. But really, how can you drive that with the system? What are the key things you should be looking for in a competency management system to help you get to that point? So we've defined three here, and I'm going to just talk about another one at the end as well. So first of all, singular focus, dual purpose. That's the phrase that we use at Hula Partners to define like a good competency management system, what it should do. And really that means the singular focus part means that competencies, the object of competency should be the foundation piece of the system, of the software. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It shouldn't be just an addition to a performance management form of high-level competencies that should be assessed on a yearly basis. It shouldn't just be a subcomponent of a learning item. It should be the key object that's driving the system for multiple reasons, and mainly because it's the best objective way to achieve what we're all after, which is a safer environment, and then to build on that to get your talent processes in sync. And the dual purpose is exactly that. It has to be architected in a way to really satisfy two different business processes. So first of all, compliance. It needs to be architected in a way where you can see, what do I need to do today to fill my compliance and regulatory standards for the current roles my employees are in, and are they fulfilling that? But on top of that, once you've got all that great data in the system, the assessments and objective knowledge of your workforce, then that's great for the career development. So where are they today, and where do we want them to go, and what do they need to do to get there? So a competency management system should be able to do both of these aspects. Integration. So competency management system has to be integrated both architecturally and from a business processing part into your other talent processes, and also architecturally from an IT perspective. So first of all, it has to be integrated to your core HRIS, and that is consuming the users, their jobs, their supervisors, the reporting hierarchy, the organizations, from your system of truth, your HRIS. It's maintained there, but it has to be absorbed into your competency management system quite regularly too. Now, why is that important? It's important because that's the data that is key to ensuring that users have the right sets of requirements at a given time, and the right people are assessing these users. So if it's not maintained regularly, or it's not accurate, then people are going to end up being assigned the wrong requirements. It's going to be out of date, and you're going to have compliance gaps all over the place. Learning. So as we mentioned multiple times today, learning is a key aspect of safety management and competency management. And from a systems perspective, you have to absorb and consume that learning data, again, probably frequently on a daily basis. You have to consume the learning items, the courses from your LMS, and you have to consume the user's history from your LMS as well, so you can match those up against one another. Talent is another thing that we've mentioned from a business process perspective, but you have to think about the system as well. It has to be able to integrate to your talent management systems for them to really drive power. So what do I mean by that? So firstly, from a recruiting perspective, you may have some key competencies that you need to recruit for in these technical positions. From a succession perspective, you might want to build your talent pools, your technical talent pools, based on the competency management information, and then push that to your talent management system. And thirdly, from development, you have all of this great information in the competency management system. It has to be able to help you create the development plans and maybe manage that in your talent management system, if it cannot manage it within the competency management system. And the final thing from an integration perspective is scheduling. If you have a scheduling system, a separate scheduling system to ensure that you are putting the right people on the right task. You just jump back there. Thank you. It's key to have that scheduling process based on the objective data, again, that competencies bring. So if you want to make sure you have a safe crew, then the best way when you're scheduling the crew is to have that technical competency management data at your fingertips. The third thing I'm going to cover is mobility. So competency management system is only as good as the assessments that are in there, the real objective assessments. And one of the key flaws in many systems is you have to be connected, you have to be in an office to do your assessment maybe on a yearly basis, and all of that knowledge is being lost. So a good competency management system has to be mobile, and it has to have the ability to work in remote locations, so offline modes, because that's where you can do the best assessments. That's where you can have a subject matter expert in the field watching someone perform a task and go through and making sure that they've checked off all the objective tasks that person can perform. The one thing that's not on here that I just want to mention, and it's key, is visibility. Your system has to empower the users, the supervisors, the executives to have visibility into teams and their competence at a given point. And by that I mean you need to have a dashboard, you need to see people, and you need to see the requirements and the skills assigned to these people and how they're doing at a given time. If you can't see the information, then it's not going to be used in the field, and it's not going to add any value. So they're the key features of a successful competency management system.
Thanks, Tom. So how do we get started? You know, it's a complex area, but the one thing we would tell you is don't get overwhelmed and don't try to cover every job role in your first go round. The other critical part of this is that we feel like it's a continuous improvement process. So it's a loop. You don't roll out a competency framework and then be done with it. It needs care and feeding. It needs part of the idea of a program such as this is that it is a self-improving program. You're always gleaning data out of the program to refine your competencies, for instance, refine the behaviors by which you're rating or assessing your employees. So, approaching this from a continuous improvement perspective is important, which means there needs to be a commitment from senior leadership that this is important. It also means that HR has to participate because, as you've heard, there are strong ties to HR processes and HR data, and if HR comes to the table on this, there's a real chance of success. But as with anything else, preparation is key. Any program requires the requisite amount of preparation, which is getting all those key stakeholders, getting your operations people in a room, doing a job task analysis, and breaking down each of the jobs, and getting that commitment to prioritize the most impactful roles in the company. That's the start. And Tom, you want to talk a little bit about building a catalog and some best practices around that?
Sure, yeah. It really does feed into the next step, the construction roles as well. These two are kind of intertwined when you first initially construct your catalog. But I'll go through that step first. So building a catalog is really quite important, and really the data you put in there and how you structure it. So firstly, you need to have it, make sure it's accurate enough, it's in enough detail that actually satisfies the job task analysis that you've done in the prepare stage. So you need to make sure that each competency can be maintained at a level that really does add value. From a structure perspective, you also need to make sure that it's just easy to navigate. Someone has to maintain this, and if they can't find the competencies because it makes no sense from a structure perspective, then they're not going to be maintained, they're going to get out of date, and it's going to not add any value to your system. You also need to make sure that you drive consistency through your competency management structure. And by this, and this is a key point, you don't want to have it too remote, so where one group is creating their catalog, another group is creating their catalog with no overall oversight of what's happening, because you start to duplicate competencies at that point. So one team will have the exact same competency as another team, but it becomes two competencies in your system. And the real problem with that, not only is it inefficient and hard to maintain, but the problem it becomes from a mobility and analytics perspective. So from mobility, if someone's been assessed in one of those competencies, you can't judge them against that competency as a whole because there's duplicates. There might be, it makes it more difficult to move people around your organization because they have to be reassessed even if they've completed a very similar competency before. And from an analytics perspective, if you want to go to your executives and say, we are N% competent in this specific area, that becomes very hard when you have duplicates all over the place. So you really need to have the subject matter experts take control of this, but you need to have the HR working with them to holistically to have some oversight in this step.
Yeah, and then the concept of a role and the idea of organizing all of the, so when you build your catalog, it's like building a library, and you're putting all of the shelves in the library and you're filling those shelves with books. When you're building a role, which is going to be something that you actually assign out to a person, you're actually collecting books off of various shelves and putting them in a basket or in a cart. And that cart makes up all the requirements that an individual needs to satisfy due to the fact that maybe they're in a specific job code and also in a specific location. So the concept of a role and constructing those roles and then putting expectations against those roles. So by being a junior apprentice, operations person, you may have a certain proficiency expectation versus being a senior a senior person in that same role will have different expectations. So all of those types of nuances need to be accommodated in your model and in your roles, and then you need a very flexible engine by way of assigning out those roles to your people. So this is where that HR data becomes very important, where we consider job codes maybe too global to handle all of the nuanced requirements, and you may need job code in addition to location or some other attribute that's unique to your organization, and able to be able to make effective, efficient role assignments. So those become very important. I know we're running a little bit short on time, so we're kind of starting to get through this material pretty quickly. But the idea is that once you have your catalog, then you organize roles, and then you have methods by which you assign those roles out to individual people, and then you go through a baseline assessment process. So you need a system and a process which has very empirical, objective assessment criteria, and a very flexible way of doing the assessments that's user friendly, very intuitive, and gets you to a point where you can get a very good baseline handle on where you are against your base set of competency requirements. And then finally, that should lead into employee development, learning, and closing the gaps that are critical in your organization. And then the feedback loop, again, is things like, wow, we really got it wrong on this job task analysis. We missed 5 critical key competencies. Well, your users need some outlet to be able to provide that information back, such that the competency catalog gets updated, and you can again manage change throughout the life cycle of this competency process. So sorry to rush through this last slide here. There's just a lot to this process that we are very passionate about and would love to go into more detail with you about if you're interested. Certainly have our contact information. So really quickly, some of the demographics by industry where we're seeing success. Again, oil and gas as a whole, all disciplines within oil and gas, or all job functions, seem to be really getting into formal competency management. We see a lot of benefit in engineering heavy environments, so aerospace, infrastructure engineering, construction. We are seeing an uptick in the commercial airlines in terms of MRO, airport operations, freight and cargo logistics, a lot of regulation and impact to doing competency management there. Obviously, utilities with nuclear and transmission and distribution being very safety conscious industries. And then, some of the other regulated industries that there are certainly potential. So we are at the top of the hour. Appreciate everybody's hanging in there with us, and really that's what we had to present on this webinar today. So Scott, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, absolutely. Jai and Tom, thank you so much for your time today. An extremely thorough presentation, exceeding all expectations, I would say. Thank you very much for walking us through this process, and very timely presentation, I would imagine, as well, especially in all those industries you mentioned, but basically in any workplace. So thank you very much to all who are in attendance, and also to our Thought Leadership Council members who are on the call today. The recording will be available soon, and you will get an automated email from the system with a link to the recording. And it will also be posted later this afternoon on our website, www.hrotoday.com/association. And if you go to the Tools tab, it will be right there. So I would like to thank Jai and Tom again for their time today, and have a great weekend. Thank you very much for attending. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.